The dust of the Arizona Territory clung to everything, fine red powder coating the sparse junipers and the solitary cabin belonging to Leland Lee Vance. Lee was 23, a farmer trying to coax life from land that seemed determined to refuse it. He lived a quiet, isolated life, preferring the rhythm of the plow to the volatile company of men. He knew the frontier was a savage place, but he kept his head down, focusing on his beans and his barley, convinced that if he bothered nothing, nothing would bother him. That illusion shattered just before sundown on a blistering August evening. He was drawing water from the well when he heard the sound, not the crack of a rifle, but a desperate, ragged gasp, followed by the faint rustling of dry brush. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy pistol he kept holstered beneath his worn coat. What he saw was not a lone rider or a predator, but three figures emerging from the dusty cover of the arroyo, three young Apache women. They were exhausted, their traditional buckskin clothing torn and stained, and they moved with a halting, painful urgency that spoke of days spent running. The eldest, Nijoni, meaning beautiful, was perhaps 19. She moved with a warrior's alertness despite her clear physical distress, her arm clutched tightly to her ribs. The middle sister, Yazzie, little one, was 16, quieter, moving with her head bowed, her dark hair shielding her face. The youngest, a girl of no more than 12 named Tala, Water, was clearly the weakest, leaning heavily on Yazzie, her small frame trembling not just from fear, but from fever. Their eyes, dark and sharp, fixed instantly on Lee. It was a look he had seen before in trapped animals, a mixture of desperate need and absolute terror. They hadn't seen him yet, they were focused on the well, the life-giving water a beacon in the dying light. But when Nijoni finally spotted him, standing still and tall by the well head, she stopped dead. Her hand darted to her side, finding only air where a knife should have been. The silence that followed was thick with cultural hate and historical pain. Lee knew exactly what he was looking at. These were not hostile raiders. These were fugitives, and their condition suggested they had escaped something far worse than the harsh desert. Their torn clothing, the unnatural stillness of Yazzie, and the defensive posture of Nijoni were clear signs of violence. Lee, who had never exchanged a word with an Apache, suddenly felt the overwhelming weight of every historical transgression committed by men who looked like him. He understood, instinctively, that he was the immediate threat, the embodiment of every white man who had ever betrayed, harmed, or captured their people. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply lifted the bucket of cool water he had just drawn, placed it gently on the ground, and took 2 deliberate steps back, putting his hands slowly in the air, open and empty. "Water," he murmured, his voice low and steady, careful not to look directly at them, respecting the cultural taboo. Nijoni watched him for a long, agonizing moment. Her eyes darted from his hands, to his rifle propped against the well house, and back to the water. The desperate thirst of her youngest sister finally won the battle against mistrust. With a sharp nod to her sisters, she let them collapse to their knees by the bucket. Tala drank first, gulping the water with pitiful, animal urgency. Lee remained still, his arms raised. He gave them space and silence, the 2 most precious commodities when dealing with trauma. After Yazzie had drunk, Nijoni finally spoke, her English broken but clear, a thin layer of venom coating the words. "They hunt us. White men. Traitors." Lee understood, slave traders, likely men from the reservation borders who preyed on isolated bands. "My cabin," he said, nodding towards the small, rough-hewn structure. "Safe. No men here. I am Leland Vance." Nijoni looked at the cabin, then at Lee. The mistrust was palpable, but the alternative, facing the desert wounded and hunted, was death. She made her decision, driven by Tala's feverish shaking. She spoke rapidly in Apache to her sisters, and together, they began to move slowly toward the cabin. The first week was a silent, intense negotiation of trust. Lee moved with exaggerated slowness, never turning his back on them completely, yet never meeting their eyes with challenging intent. He slept outside on the porch, leaving his single room to the sisters. He tended his garden and his few animals, projecting an image of quiet routine and harmless utility. He brought them simple food, fresh beans, baked bread, and occasionally a rabbit he hunted far from the cabin, always leaving it just inside the door before retreating. Najoni was the guard, sleeping lightly, the faintest sound bringing her instantly awake. Yazzie was the healer, quietly using herbs she found on the ranch perimeter to treat Najoni's bruised ribs and Tala's inflamed leg, which was badly cut. Tala was the barometer. She watched Lee constantly, her feverish suspicion slowly softening into simple observation. One afternoon, Lee returned from the fields to find Najoni standing outside the cabin, watching him. "The men," she said, her tone flat. "They hurt us before. Many times. They lie. They take." It wasn't a question, but a statement of the truth that defined their mistrust. It was the trauma that built their defenses, and Lee knew his task wasn't to talk his way past it, but to live his way through it. "I am not those men," Lee replied, looking at the ground as he chopped firewood. "I am a farmer. I build. I do not take." He continued to build. He repaired a section of fence that had rotted. He built a low, flat stone cooking area outside the cabin so they wouldn't have to rely on his smoky fireplace. He brought them soft cotton rags for bandages, painstakingly tearing up one of his own few spare shirts. He taught himself a few essential Apache words: to, water, da, eat, nagai, go/leave, and used them sparingly, signaling his respect for their language. The breakthrough, subtle and fragile, came 2 weeks in. Tala's fever broke, and the infection in her leg receded. One morning, Lee found a small, carefully braided piece of dried grass tied to the handle of his water bucket. It was a gesture, not a word, but it was the first sign of acknowledgement. Later that day, Lee was struggling to turn a particularly stubborn patch of dry earth. The heavy plow kept snagging on the roots. He heard a soft sound behind him and turned to see Najoni and Yazzie watching. Without a word, Yazzie walked over, picked up a sturdy, forked branch, and began expertly digging around the worst of the roots, freeing the plow. Najoni joined her, and the three of them worked in silence under the brutal sun, an unspoken harmony of shared labor replacing the tension of the previous days. The cultural barrier hadn't been defeated by lofty ideals, but by the unwavering respect shown in simple, shared work. They learned his quiet intensity, he learned their profound efficiency and connection to the land. One evening, as the sun dipped below the distant mountains, painting the sky in fiery hues, Najoni approached him where he sat on the porch. "We leave now," she stated. "Tala is strong. We owe you a life." "You owe me nothing," Lee said quickly, looking up, his heart sinking at the thought of the sudden silence that would return. "I gave what I could. I wish you safety." Najoni nodded slowly, her dark eyes holding his gaze for the first time without fear or aggression, just clarity. "The traitors. They were hunting near the river. They will come back. Not for us. But they will see your fence, your new stone fire. They will know we rested here." She paused. "You showed us what men can be. But your kindness is a danger to you now." Lee understood the warning immediately. His act of compassion had marked his home. "Then I will wait," he said, rising. "This is my home. I won't run." "You fight," she challenged. "Only if I have to." Najoni walked away, conferring with her sisters. They were leaving the next morning, but the knowledge that his life was now at risk because of his choice to save them sat heavy on Lee's conscience. The three sisters prepared their small packs by firelight. But when dawn broke, they were not heading into the desert. They were positioned at the perimeter of the farm, hidden in the brush, their movements precise and silent. They had made their impossible choice, they couldn't leave the one man who had shown them kindness to face the consequences alone. They had chosen to fight for the man who chose them. The traitors, 4 rough-looking, armed men, arrived mid-morning. They saw the neat farm, the new stone cooking pit, and immediately understood what had happened. They approached the cabin, guns drawn. Vance, their leader, a grizzled man named Bart, shouted. "We know you sheltered them. Hand over the squaws, and we'll only gut you instead of hanging you." Lee stepped out of the cabin, empty-handed, his face grim. "There's no one here but me." As the traders advanced, Najoni moved. It wasn't a head-on charge, but a diversion, a single, sharp sound from the south side of the field, drawing two of the men away. Yazzie, using the distraction, moved in the opposite direction, creating a flanking movement that made the remaining two traders hesitant. Lee saw his opening. He wasn't a fighter, but he was fast. He ducked back inside the cabin, grabbed his rifle, and fired a shot over their heads, scattering the men. The ensuing fight was quick and brutal, driven by the sisters' superior knowledge of the terrain and Lee's sudden, desperate fury. The sisters, relying on stones and speed, expertly disabled the two distracted traders. Lee, firing with practiced precision, drove the remaining men back. Bart, the leader, realizing he was outmaneuvered by an invisible enemy, shouted a curse and fled, dragging one wounded man with him. The silence returned, but this time it was a redemption, not of the land, but of the moment. Lee stood in the field, rifle smoking, watching the dust settle. Najoni, Yazzie, and Tala emerged, their faces etched with the effort of the fight. There was no hatred now, only exhaustion and shared purpose. "You are not a farmer," Najoni stated, looking at his easy command of the rifle. Lee shrugged. "I am what the frontier makes me." He walked toward them, putting his rifle down. "You risked your safety for me. Why?" Najoni met his gaze, the remnants of her defensive wall finally collapsing. "We have seen the worst of men," she said softly. "We fight now only for the best of men. We go south. Come with us. Your land is marked. You can't stay." Lee looked at the scarred earth, his failed crops, and the smoldering hatred of the men who would surely return. Then he looked at the three sisters, one fierce, one gentle, and one still a child, who had chosen his life over their own freedom. The deep divide of culture and fear had finally been bridged by the courage to trust and the simple, profound act of shared defense. He smiled, a wide, genuine expression that transformed his rugged face. "I think," he said, picking up his saddlebag, "I'm tired of farming this rock anyway. Let's ride." And as the four of them turned south, leaving the barren farm for the untamed freedom of the frontier, fear finally gave way to hope, proving that even in the Wild West, humanity could forge a connection that violence could never define.